Darth Vader versus Yoda. Yoda versus Darth Vader. The Chosen One versus the Grand Master. The Broken versus the Sage. Whether discussed on YouTube videos, podcasts, battle boards, or even schoolyard playgrounds, this has been a versus debate that has persisted within the Star Wars community for years. Thematically speaking, much of the interest in this matchup stems from the narrative set up by the films. New Hope introduces Ben Kenobi as this incredible wizard who coasts through obstacles left and right, yet when he finally goes head-to-head with Vader, he loses. Fast forward to Empire and we are introduced to Yoda, a Jedi Master who appears to possess even more ability than Ben, yet he dies of old age shortly thereafter. Fast forward again, or rewind? I don't know. To the prequels, and we finally get to see Yoda in action, but in a setting where Vader doesn't exist yet. Further adding to the issue is the fact that these two characters are among the most popular in the Star Wars franchise. They have displayed semi-comparable feats of skill and power, and are constantly being updated with new combative material re-sparking the debate. In today's discussion, I will at long last be throwing my saber into the arena and give you my opinion on this iconic matchup. While the idea of constructing a full-blown Darth Vader versus Yoda versus video has crossed my mind on several occasions, I've come to the conclusion that doing so would actually be more limiting than helpful in the long term. Here's the deal. I am a staunch supporter of individual thinking and have stressed since literally day one that my videos are to be taken solely as my personal opinion. That being said, I'm also not so arrogant that I can't see when those personal opinions mirror those of other fans. A Darth Vader versus Grandmaster Yoda versus vid made by me may possess a few unique qualities owing to my personal presentation style, but most of what I would have to say about the two fighters' attributes mechanically would just be regurgitations of points you have seen a million times already from others. Furthermore, you guys have also asked my opinion on the licensed instances of Vader dueling Yoda, as well as the videos made by my friends addressing this fight, which I can't really do in the confines of a normal versus series discussion. As such, I'm going to divide this analysis into 3 opinion-based segments. Number 1 will be a compacted versus series. This segment will showcase my thoughts on Vader versus Yoda in the style of a versus video, yet will be presented simply and to the point so as to not waste time. The subcategories here, as usual, will be physical attributes, martial arts training and tactical skill, and force abilities. Number 2 will be official works. This will be the segment where we cover direct examples of Vader and Yoda fighting that have been published under the official Star Wars brand. And yeah, you'll notice I put official in quotes. You'll see why later. Finally, number 3 will be commentary. Here, I'll give my personal opinions on the well-known versus/rebuttal videos made by my friends Jen Sarai 1 and Antoine Bandelet. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Unlike the other attributes we will be covering in this segment, the debate of Darth Vader's and Yoda's physical attributes is a fairly straightforward contest for me to judge. Taken at face value, this would be a total stomp for Vader, however, Yoda's use of force augmentation makes it anything but. On a purely biological level, Vader's human anatomy affords him greater height and reach than the diminutive Jedi Master, as well as better adaptability to environmental extremes. As far as force-enhanced strength goes, Yoda's top feat in this area was when he hefted a large steel crate containing a mini chain gun on his back in Clone Wars Adventures Volume 3. While extremely impressive, Vader was completely unfazed by the combined weight of a dozen stormtroopers, that's over a ton by the way, has shattered enormous stone pillars by simply backing into them, overcome the pull of an open airlock, and despite being heavily injured, was still able to physically overpower Return of the Jedi Darth Sidious, a being who I'm sure we can all agree possessed equal if not superior augmentation abilities to the Grand Master. Moving into stamina, you don't really need to read any supplementary material to know this, but Yoda's advanced age has been confirmed by numerous novels and guides to hamper his ability to hold down a long-term lightsaber duel above and beyond what the Force can impart. This isn't to say that his fortitude is completely worthless. Let us not forget that Yoda's duel with Sidious in the Senate arena wasn't that much shorter than Obi-Wan's and Vader's on Mustafar, which is generally accepted to have lasted around 20 to 30 minutes. Still, that doesn't change the fact that even in this scenario, Yoda was stated to have experienced tremendous fatigue, and is even implied to have pushed his Force Valor abilities far beyond their usual limits. Darth Vader, meanwhile, can hold down 20-minute slogs without tiring, a good example being his fight with the Starkiller clone, and on at least one occasion has even cranked it up to the several-hour mark thanks to the rejuvenative properties of his suit. While I vehemently oppose the notion that the Dark Lord's stamina is unlimited, since the lore makes it clear that an exorbitant amount of physical stress can cause his lungs to exceed the capacity of his respirator, it doesn't really matter since Yoda lacks the necessary physical output to place the Sith under that kind of pressure. Durability then! Yeah, not much debate here either. While Yoda withstanding light scorches from a lightsaber and sustained blasts of Force lightning are noteworthy feats in his corner, not only has Vader literally endured identical punishment with better results, but he has been put through ringers that would leave Yoda a smoldering pile of dust on the floor. Finally, we have Force-enhanced speed, and this is where things get, shall we say, tricky. Yoda is superior to Darth Vader when it comes to speed. He has better accolades, better feats, and a fighting style that leverages it, well, better. Vader's hampered mobility has been a defining aspect of his character since day one, and although his attempts to overcome these weaknesses are commendable, they still remained a serious liability throughout his entire career. That being said, I do think the severity of Yoda's speed advantage over Vader has been slightly inflated by the fanbase. During their confrontation on Balesia, Darth Vader's speed bursts were described by Ferris Olin as exceeding those of anyone he had ever encountered with the sole exception of Yoda. While the value of this statement is of course subjective, given that Olin fails to specify just how close to Yoda's speed Vader was, the fact that he even felt the need to make this comparison speaks volumes about the Dark Lord's abilities. Addressing the elephant currently staring unhealthily at me from the corner of this room, yes, there are the matters of Vader never engaging an opponent with speed equal to Yoda's, as well as the numerous instances of his flanks being subverted by opponents below Yoda's level. I'll save my views on the latter point for the martial arts section, but as far as the former is concerned, Vader's high-caliber opponents may not have matched the Grand Master directly in speed, but they were far from slow. His victory over Ben Kenobi is particularly notable since he should, by all rights, scale somewhat to Count Dooku in his old age, who we know can contend with Yoda's speed. To hammer this in, Sidious has made note of Darth Vader's overall superiority to Tyrannus, so it follows that the prospect of Vader standing his ground here is probable. Speaking of the Emperor, he himself, as of Revenge of the Sith, scales to Yoda in terms of speed, and the novel Lords of the Sith depicts a sequence wherein Vader actually moves with greater speed than him during a mission to Ryloth.
"Come here, girl," the Emperor said, putting the power of the Force into his command. Unable to resist, the girl walked out of the tree line until she stood small and vulnerable before him. With preternatural speed, the Emperor drew, ignited, and slashed at the girl with his lightsaber. But Vader had sensed his master's intent and moved with greater speed, igniting his own blade and intercepting his master's blow before it could land. The girl, under the sway of the Emperor's power, seemed scarcely to notice the danger. She simply stood there, staring vacantly, her face aglow in the red light of the crossed blade.
Now, again, the value of this feat is very questionable, since Vader later muses that his master had been holding back throughout the book to test him. However, it is worth noting that the book never specifies how much effort Vader had to put into blocking his master's strike, which leaves things a bit open-ended. Plus, there's the matter of where this Sidious stands in comparison to this one, but we'll get into that later. All in all, while Yoda definitely takes the cake from Darth Vader in terms of Force-augmented speed, it's not to the degree that would result in an instantaneous win like with Palpatine versus the Council. Add that to the Sith Lord's significant advantages in all other areas, and the conclusion is pretty clear. Physical edge to Darth Vader. Okay, let's do this. To put it simply, Darth Vader and Grandmaster Yoda were martial arts paragons. Both have been regarded by multiple sources as standing amongst the finest lightsaber duelists of their respective eras, elevating the act of combat to its highest, purest form. Each Titan also has many displays of incredible dueling feats under their belts. Yoda having bested the likes of Count Dooku and successfully disarming Darth Sidious, while Vader has outright slain such notables as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Eth Koth, and Anya Kuro. Though the exact specifics of the engagement are unknown, the Power of the Jedi sourcebook states that Yoda defeated Mace Windu in a presumed sparring match at some point prior to the Clone Wars. Similarly, both the Starkiller clone and Darth Maul have stated outright that they would be unable to defeat Darth Vader without some form of aid. In regards to martial knowledge, one argument that you fortunately don't see much of these days is that Yoda would be able to overcome Darth Vader via his supposed mastery of more lightsaber forms. This is simply false, as Vader, like Yoda, has been credited with total mastery of all 7 classical Jedi fighting styles, putting them on equal footing. And even if he hadn't, it's still not relevant as an overall factor. Additionally, the often cited claim that Darth Vader's greater battlefield experience is an inherently superior advantage over the Grand Master is false, since it should be clear that sparring with hundreds of the galaxy's greatest swords beings for centuries would bridge this gap quite handily. The only thing that might change that is a serious gap in strength in the Force, which doesn't apply here. When it comes to comparing their respective saber techniques, Darth Vader and Grandmaster Yoda conducted themselves in almost diametrically opposing fashions, yet with very much the same goals in mind. Unlike more conventional Djem-So and Ataru specialists like Darth Malgus and Satele Shan, who led their offensives with overwhelming one-directional maneuvers, Vader and Yoda focused on undermining their opponents through a series of staccato attacks. For the Sith Lord, this tactic was achieved through a judicious mixture of strength, dexterity, and stalwart defense. As seen throughout the Great Jedi Purge, Vader's preferred methodology was to employ the hacking counters of Djem-So in concert with the precise stabs of Makashi to simultaneously beat down and dissect an adversary's guard. While the hampered mobility imposed by his armor made the traditional acrobatic evasions of Ataru nearly impossible for the Dark Lord to pull off, his planted application of Shi-Cho feints combined with masterful Sarisu blade work centered at his core enabled him to facilitate a saber guard that has been described by Starkiller as impenetrable. For the Grand Master, this tactic was achieved through a blend of subtlety and misdirection, using the rapid and unpredictable sequences of Ataru to simultaneously bypass his opponent's attacks and get inside their guard, leaving him primed to unleash a quick and devastating counter. This is just loose speculation, but I also believe that Yoda's primary subversion technique was the Saber Swarm, as many of its core tenets, such as the rapid execution of short strikes aimed at an adversary's flank, can be seen in the Grand Master's personal style. While Ataru is known to lack a strong defense, the Grandmaster compensated for this with his perfection of Surisu and Shien, evading strikes with deft parries and subtle dodges, which is best represented in the Attack of the Clones novelization. While both combatants employed styles that could only be rivaled by the top 1% of lightsaber duelists, neither was without fault. As Dooku pointed out in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, Djem So's primary weakness was its lack of mobility, a weakness that, when coupled with his heavy armor, left Darth Vader at an inherent disadvantage against agile speed fencers, as well as assaults that came from two vectors simultaneously, whether through master-level Jarkai, integrated physical combat, or some combination of the two. Furthermore, while the Sith Lord's primary tactic of pattern recognition enabled him to suss out and counter the fighting styles of virtually any run-of-the-mill swordsman, this approach was hampered whenever he was faced with more improvisational freeform duelists like Roan Shrine or Galen Marek, as their constantly shifting techniques had no consistent pattern for him to analyze and respond to. Yoda's weaknesses were similarly mechanical. Various sources have noted that Form 4 is an exhausting practice, best employed in short, calculated bursts. This means that the Grand Master, by nature, burns off a lot of energy, which, when paired with his old age, makes his style unsustainable in the long term. Granted, Yoda has never actually been portrayed losing a pure lightsaber duel by way of this weakness, but given how both of his short bouts with Dooku left him visibly drained, it's clear that if he were ever pitted against someone who could match him in skill and power, these shortcomings would come into play. Additionally, as many of Yoda's movements were based around dynamic full-body rotations, this means that his momentum could be arrested if one were to strike him before he could complete a spin. This was best showcased in the short comic Luke Skywalker and the Treasure of the Dragon Snakes, wherein the titular ward employed a saber throw just as his master was about to attempt an overhand chop, forcing him to divert mid-air and being left open to a counterattack. Now that we've got the pros and cons of each combatant's technique laid out, let's examine their respective viability. When placed side by side, Darth Vader's and Grandmaster Yoda's lightsaber techniques are almost perfect counters to each other. Vader's style is effective against Yoda because his precise maneuvering coupled with his monstrous strength allows him to better endure the Grandmaster's assault and slip-in counters to arrest his momentum. This is helped along by the fact that one of the core tenets of Form 5 lightsaber combat is the turning of an opponent's attack back against them, which is a strategy proven effective against users of Form 4 time and time again. Yoda's style, meanwhile, is effective against Vader because his flank subversions enable him to dodge around the Dark Lord's hacking cleaves and pick him apart with a focused slash. This is helped along by the fact that Djem So's aforementioned mobility weakness, which is, kind of Ataru's whole thing, is exacerbated in Vader due to his heavy armor. While on paper such conditions would result in an impasse, things become less confounded when the feats of both duelists are taken into account. And now we're back at that elephant. As mentioned previously, one of the most common arguments used in favor of Yoda whenever this debate comes up is the fact that Vader's flanks have been subverted by opponents below the Grandmaster's level. Specifically, the cases of Ahsoka Tano, Galen Marek, and pre-prime Luke Skywalker. While I do think the significance of these displays are a little overhyped at times due to the factors surrounding them, such as Tano's inability to leverage her acrobatics in a lethal manner, or the Dark Lord's noted overconfidence and restraint when facing Marek and Luke, it doesn't change the reality of the situation. Even if we were to discount these three instances due to their mild circumstances, both Anya Kuro and the doppelganger Darth Maul have disarmed and/or scored hits on Darth Vader by way of superior speed in fights that were completely unencumbered. If these highly skilled but still lesser duelists can accomplish such things against Vader, so too should Yoda with greater ease. That being said, the nature of Yoda's feats does mean that the Dark Lord isn't helpless. While the Grand Master was undoubtedly the more dominant fighter in both his engagements with Count Dooku, Tyrannus still held out quite well. matching his former master blow for blow and even managing to score hits before being ultimately overwhelmed. Vader, as a Sith, has never personally engaged Dooku or a direct equivalent, yes, but considering Sidious's respective praises as well as his victory over A New Hope Kenobi, who is only marginally inferior to Revenge of the Sith Kenobi, who Dooku straight up admits he can't overcome in a direct saber duel, it's not unreasonable to scale him to an equal if not superior level. As such, Vader would still be able to contend with Yoda on the back of skill alone regardless of his stylistic shortcomings. Many are quick to point out that Yoda has never been defeated by a fighter who employs a technique like Vader's, but that's only true because we've never seen Yoda engage an opponent who uses a technique like Vader's. Mace Windu is similar, but similar only takes you so far, and we also don't know anything about how that duel played out. As a side note, while I don't consider it a, shall we say, major source of information, the Clone Wars lightsaber duels game makes reference to Plo Koon, another Form 5 specialist, actually defeating Yoda in a lightsaber duel on at least one occasion.
I heard you're one of the only Jedi to have ever beaten Master Yoda in a duel.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a little hesitant to acknowledge this accolade as fact, but if you absolutely want to, well, there you go. A fighter similar in technique, but lesser in skill than Darth Vader, besting Yoda in a lightsaber duel. Even with that possible point in Vader's corner, Yoda's edge is quickly reaffirmed by the Dark Lord's ineffectual compensations. As noted by the short story In His Image, Darth Vader's primary strategies for dealing with speedier opponents was to herd them into a tight space that restricts their freedom of movement, or, when all else fails, muster his rage to the point where he is able to briefly overcome his handicaps through sheer force channeling. These tactics may have been enough to overcome a being of normal humanoid stature and lesser power like, say, Kuis, but against the Grand Master, such things would be fairly lukewarm. Yoda is so freaking small that not only is his body exposure reduced, but unless Vader intends to fling him into a foxhole, herding into a small space would just end up working against the big lug in the long term. While I view the Dark Lord's Berserker Rage augmentation mode as a more effective strategy, his inherent inferiority to Yoda in terms of power means that unless he somehow managed to tap into his buried Chosen One state, such an amp would only put the two on equal footing, and temporarily at that. At the end of the day, when it comes to a contest of pure lightsaber combat, Darth Vader and Grandmaster Yoda are without question in the same league. Their comparable skill levels and nuanced techniques allowing them to exploit the weaknesses of the other to their foremost conclusion. However, Vader has less extensive a training background, poorly optimized, for this fight, fallbacks, and has been tagged time and again by blitzkrieg opponents below the Grandmaster's level of ability. This isn't to say that Yoda is flawless, as he has been challenged and, depending on perspective, defeated by beings inferior to Vader, but when all is said and done, his shortcomings are simply the less glaring of the two. Martial arts and tactical edge to Grandmaster Yoda. Just as with their skill with the lightsaber, Darth Vader and Grandmaster Yoda were paragons when it came to their skill with and connection to the Force. While my usual format in a versus discussion is to start with a broad description of a combatant's overall power, then work my way down into skill and arsenal, I'm going to be approaching this one from the opposite direction since this debate is more frequently associated with the wider aspects of Force combat. With that said, let's dive in. As far as just pure loadouts go, neither Vader or Yoda were lacking when it came to the powers typically associated with followers of the Jedi and Sith arts. Both could utilize the standard practices of physical augmentation, telekinesis, and telepathy without any sort of inadequacy or handicap, i.e. Corran Horn. Both could also utilize more advanced combative abilities such as concealment, weather alteration, and tutaminis. Vader's aptitude with the latter hovering at around blaster bolt level, one exception notwithstanding, while Yoda's sat firmly in the highest Sith lightning range. There were a handful of differences, however. Although his prosthetic hands prevented Darth Vader from employing the Sith staple of Force Lightning, he did possess skill with the obscure kinetite variation, as well as the insidious Consume Essence and Force Fury. The Dark Lord was also versed in the art of Sith magics, having crafted illusions convincing enough to fool an untrained Luke Skywalker, and transforming the historian Faye Pateru into a Rakaghoul monster. Though I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the latter feat was only accomplished while in close vicinity to the Myrrh Talisman, a powerful Sith artifact. Following from that pleasant imagery, Yoda's powers included the advanced Jedi battle meditation and the ever-luminous Force Ghost technique. While I admit the text is somewhat vague in its description, fallen Jedi Baldorian's comments in the novel Planet of Twilight strongly suggest that the Grand Master was also capable of using the rare Force Light ability, which, as the name suggests, involved the channeling of the Force into withering blasts of light side energy intended to diminish or destroy dark side energies. Now that we've established their respective arsenals, let's move into skill. Darth Vader and Grandmaster Yoda were without question two of the most skillful Force users their respective orders ever produced, having been noted by numerous sources for their mastery. In combat, both have employed their powers in nuanced and tactically advantageous ways, be it manipulating the surrounding environment to jockey for better positioning, or chaining multiple techniques together to shock and bewilder. Subtlety was also an area in which these two masters excelled. My personal favorite examples from each being when Vader stuck a lit grenade to a rebel's hand in Purge the Tyrant's Fist Issue 1, and when Yoda deftly outmaneuvered the combined assault of Plo Koon, Saisi Tin, and Deepa Billaba during a flashback in the novel Darth Maul Shadowhunter. These sophisticated but radically different feats are prime examples of the two's disparity when it came to employing the Force in a combative setting. In keeping with the tenets of Sith philosophy, Darth Vader strongly adhered to the offensive, rarely employing anything but the most brutal and uncompromising methodologies. Rather than push you down, he would crush your throat. Rather than dismantle your lightsaber, he would overload it into a smoking metal husk. And rather than trick you into believing he was someone else, he would dredge up your worst memories and leave you paralyzed with fear. In keeping with the tenets of Jedi philosophy, Grandmaster Yoda favored defense, using his powers in a reactive manner to negate the direct assaults of opponents. Rather than make you commit suicide, he would make you forget he ever existed. Rather than throw an object at you, he'd throw yours back. And rather than fire lightning at you, he'd dispel the bolts you fired at him into nothingness. This isn't to say that these methodologies were mutually exclusive. Vader can and has used his powers for defense and counter, and Yoda can and has used his for direct assault. But in an overall sense, their respective use of the Force for combat was very much sword and shield. As for which of the two's raw skill is superior, well, just like the classic sword and shield argument, they pretty much cancel out. Vader is better at attacking with the Force, while Yoda is better at defending with it. Normally, a skill-based impasse of this sort would be offset by a special ability wildcard, but there isn't one. Yoda is incapable of using Sith Lightning, Kinetite, or Force Destruction, so Vader's usual weakness against energy-based powers are out. And Vader simply hasn't displayed sufficient Force Rage or magic feats to imply that he could easily overwhelm the Grandmaster's Force Valor and Light abilities. Long story short, it's a tie. Finally, we've come to the part I'm sure most of you have been anticipating. Power levels. Grandmaster Yoda was one of the most powerful Jedi Masters in the Order's 25,000-year history, having been compared directly to such greats as Thrawn, Nomi Sunrider, and Odan Addressing his era specifically, Anakin Skywalker was the only light side Force user who exceeded Yoda in terms of raw strength, And mind you, that is only if we judge the Chosen One by his potential rather than his actual level of power. Even Force wielders on opposing teams couldn't help but be impressed by the Grand Master's capabilities. As noted by the novel Yoda Dark Rendezvous, Count Dooku considered his former teacher's Force presence to be so immense that had he ever embraced the dark side, he would have annihilated even the likes of Darth Sidious. Speaking of the Emperor we all love to hate, various supplementary sources have credited Yoda as Revenge of the Sith Sidious's direct equal, a dynamic we see play out clearly in the film and its novelizations. You may be thinking at this point, okay, how does Vader possibly compare with that? And while I agree it's certainly a challenging prospect, this cyborg's got some punch. Darth Vader was one of the most powerful Sith Lords to ever live, ranked alongside figures such as Exar Kun, Darth Malak, Darth Bane, and Darth Krayt. Even Sith co-creator Karnes Mur, renowned for his overwhelming power and arrogance both, considered Vader a powerful Darksider, openly stating that his jailer, Celeste Moore, could not defeat him. Did I mention that he said this when the apprentice wasn't even close to his prime? Moving ahead into his era, countless sources have obviously credited Vader as the second strongest Darksider of the Imperial era. An accolade he's cemented with his humbling of powerful beings like Chronal and Antennis Tremaine, as well as his clear and stated superiority to Inquisitor Jarek. While the extensive injuries he received on Mustafar did impede Vader's ability to surpass Return of the Jedi Darth Sidious, he was by no means outclassed. Not only has the Emperor proclaimed Vader to be his most powerful apprentice, a sentiment echoed by authors, but he has even got as far as to consider him a legitimate threat to his rule. Shifting to the top of the Star Wars totem pole, George Lucas himself has stated in a 2005 issue of Vanity Fair that Darth Vader's overall power was equal to 80% that of Darth Sidious. A noticeable difference to be sure, but not an obscene one either. At first glance, with everything we know and have just discussed taken into account, the question of who is the more powerful Force wielder of the two seems obvious, and that's because it is. Darth Vader is without question one of the strongest Force wielders out there. However, Grandmaster Yoda has displayed grander levels of controllability than him on a more consistent basis. That being said, I do think the gap between these two terrors is nowhere near as large as many have claimed it to be. As noted by the Attack of the Clones novelization, while Yoda was able to effectively counter Dooku's lightning strikes with Tuta Minis, it was still far from easy for him to do so, the effort almost certainly being a contributing factor to their switching over to a saber duel. Now, some have tried to counter this by arguing that this difficulty had more to do with the nature of the Count's assault rather than the strength, since deflecting Sith lightning with Tuta Minis is noted to be extremely difficult. And while I do think there is some truth in that, we must not forget that a being's inherent level of power is also a factor in such contests. If Yoda's power was so exorbitantly ahead of Dooku's that it wouldn't even be a contest to compare them, then he would have just effortlessly batted away the lightning like a bothersome fly rather than the real effort described in the novel. This dynamic stayed true with their duel on Vajun. Yoda remained the mightier of the two, yes. However, Dooku's powers, amped by the planet's dark side nexus, were a credible challenge for him. The novel stating that he was panting under the pressure of his foe's physical augmentation. If Dooku, a being noted to be inferior to Vader in terms of power, both in his base and with an indeterminate amp, can challenge Yoda with his use of the Force, so too should Vader with a similar effort. Furthermore, while Vader has never been directly compared to the Grand Master, Nick Rostu did consider him to be more powerful than Kar Vaster, whom Mace Windu believed had power on the scale of Yoda, at least when he was operating on the Force-rich planet of Harun Kal. Of more pressing examination is Vader and Yoda's respective standing to Darth Sidious. Some of you might have noticed that I used Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi qualifiers in their respective breakdowns. This was on purpose because it relates to a larger aspect of this debate. One of the most common mistakes I've seen fans make over the years, at least in my estimation, whenever this match is discussed, is that they assume the versions of the Emperor each combatant has been scaled to are of equal strength, when that simply isn't the case at all. While the power creep was definitely not as drastic as the one he received in the Dark Empire era, Darth Sidious did become more powerful in the dark side between episodes 3 and 6. Various sources have noted his abstained from public life in order to concentrate on his relationship to the Force, and he has been depicted taking part in several battles that no doubt served as a kind of harsh training. Perhaps Sidious's most dramatic amplification came by way of his machinations on the planet Biss, wherein he fed off the energies of both the Darkside Nexus deep within its core, as well as the millions of residents he lured there. Seen in this light, the supposed enormous gap between Vader and Yoda becomes even less drastic, as the former is 80% that of a Sidious who is stronger than the one Yoda was a direct equal to. While it is true that Lucas's statements in the Vanity Fair article do not outright reflect a specific era or film, both the Return of the Jedi novelization and comics state that Darth Vader's power in the dark side was at its absolute zenith during this time frame, meaning that the 80% stat must apply to that specific incarnation of the Emperor. All this isn't to say that I view Vader as Yoda's direct equal in power, since their feats clearly say otherwise. I'm just trying to put the scaling into perspective, as well as debunk the notion that Vader would have absolutely no chance against the Grand Master if the contest came to a battle of Force abilities. Personally, I don't even think the fight would hinge on something like that, since Yoda is disinclined to use his powers in an offensive manner, and Vader is smart enough to know that any attempt to overpower the Grand Master would just be turned against him. Still though, if there's an edge to be given, it's clear to me who should get it. Force abilities edge to Yoda, and with that my opinion should be clear. Darth Vader's physical superiority coupled with his comparable dueling skill and use of the Force allows him to pose a serious challenge to Grand Master Yoda. And given an alternate incarnation like Pre-Prime or Sick, I can definitely see the Dark Lord pulling out a win. However, Yoda simply has logistics on his side. His greater speed, flank subversion tactics, and brick wall style force use being not only the exact kind of things Vader is stated to be weak against, but is shown to be against lesser opponents. This is not a stomp. Let me make that perfectly clear. Regardless of which Titan you may support more, it is inarguable that this fight would be a long-term engagement. Their similar skills and power allowing them to push the other to their absolute limits. But when all is said and done, it is my belief that the odds more strongly favor Yoda. And the moment he finally circumvented his guard, Darth Vader would be slashed to ribbons. I declare Grandmaster Yoda the winner. Alright, so I imagine you guys are probably getting a little tired at this point, so I'll try to burn through these next two segments as quickly as I can. As mentioned previously, one of the primary reasons the Vader vs. Yoda debate has persisted for so long is because, unlike Anakin vs. Obi-Wan or Mace vs. Dooku, there exists no piece of licensed canon Star Wars media that depicts the two of them fighting. That being said, there has been at least two notable non-canon works published under the official branding that offer hypothetical instances of this fight playing out. I know dissecting non-canon material sounds a little redundant, but I feel they do hold at least a little weight since they do offer a glimpse into the mindsets of the individuals making the primary content. The first and most notable non-canon instance of Vader fighting Yoda was depicted in issue 4 of the 2002 comic series Star Wars Infinity's The Empire Strikes Back. In this story, an alternate universe is presented in which Luke dies on Hoth, and through a convoluted series of events, Leia takes his place as Yoda's student on Dagobah. Having discovered the hero's location by way of another convoluted series of events, Vader arrives on the Swamp World and confronts the former Grand Master as he awaits Leia's return with her newly constructed lightsaber. Following a brief discussion, Yoda blasts Vader with Force energy. Though it appears at first like the Grand Master employed some form of energy-based defensive, the two quickly find themselves on the astral plane of the Dark Lord's mind. The two then engage in a fierce battle of minds. Yoda employs psychological deconstruction as a weapon, while Vader is attacked by the Force ghosts of Jedi he knew during his time as Anakin Skywalker. Specifically, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Mace Windu, because this was pre-Revenge of the Sith and no one knew what his ultimate fate would be. Though able to repel the specters of his former friends, Vader's mind is broken down by the revelation of his son's death, and he is reduced to a wreck of his 9-year-old state. Yoda goes to comfort the sobbing boy, and just when you think everything is going to be okay, Vader surprises him, shattering the old Jedi's lock on his mind and delivering a death blow with his lightsaber. Leia, Han, and Chewie eventually manage to defeat the Dark Lord, but not in time to save the Grand Master's life. The second non-canon instance was depicted in 2010 in the young reader's book Star Wars Head-to-Head, which takes various characters and puts them against each other in imaginary face-off fights to determine the superior combatant. There really isn't much story to this, it's literally just a 2-page spread of Yoda and Vader side by side with some stats at the bottom, and the victor revealed at the end of the book. In this scenario, Vader once again comes out ahead. The book stating, and I quote, "Vader proves too powerful for the venerable Jedi Master, who awaits a new hope to bring balance to the Force." So, what can we say about these? Well, the first and perhaps most poignant factor is that in both instances, Vader is the one who is victorious, which suggests that at least some of the Star Wars creative team favor him over the Grand Master. This alone is enough to convince some of the Dark Lord's supremacy. However, my opinion remains standing due to other major circumstances. Both fights are either implied to or directly take place when Yoda is past his prime. The duel in Infinities taking place literally 1 year before his canonical death of natural causes in Episode 6. As such, just as with the Emperor and his Episode 3 and 6 scaling, I don't feel that these works should be taken as Yoda's peak. As far as the tactics being put on display go, I actually find the mind battle in Infinities to be a rather excellent microcosm of the two's respective approaches. Vader is direct and crafty, while Yoda is defensive and subversive. Though Yoda has always possessed superior telepathic abilities to Vader when it comes to scale of influence, Vader has always been better at applying such powers in a one-to-one combative setting, which feeds into how the fight plays out. The tactic of baiting Yoda into lowering his guard with his child form is actually something I can see legitimately working due to the Grand Master's softness for children, as well as his regret of Anakin's fall. By that same token, swarming Vader with ghosts of his past and the death of a family member would work wonders due to his emotional instability. On the whole, while neither work offers a concrete conclusion to the Vader-Yoda debate, they do offer a glimmer of insight into the minds of the creators, as well as a decent display of their strengths and weaknesses in relation to each other. Check them out if you want, but don't expect absolute resolution. Last but not least, we have the commentary section. On August 31st, 2017, my friend Jensarai1 released a Versus Series redux of his old Darth Vader vs. Grandmaster Yoda video, wherein he presented his belief that Vader would win. 2 days later, my friend Antoine Bandelet released a rebuttal video on his channel presenting his thoughts on Connor's breakdowns, as well as an opinion of Yoda being the one who should come out on top. Now, I originally wasn't going to include a commentary on these when I started drafting this script. The videos are a year old at this point, and many of the points addressed by them either mirror or are only slight alterations of what I myself believe. However, as my other friend Ready4 pointed out, if I want this discussion to stand as both a personal opinion piece and a dive into the broader Star Wars community, it would be unbecoming of me not to give my opinions on these videos. After all, they are arguably the most well-known fan-created Vader vs. Yoda works out there. That being said, there is something I need to make abundantly clear before we get started. First and foremost, this is not, I repeat, not intended to be taken as a slight to either Gensarai 1 or Antoine Bandelet in any way, shape, or form. These two are my friends. I have nothing but respect for their opposing viewpoints. All I'm going to be doing is going through portions of their respective videos and offering either constructive criticism or rebuttal where I feel it is necessary. If you are someone with no respect, kindly go watch something else, as I will not tolerate you using what I say here as ammunition against my friends. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started.
Despite being a blasted husk of humanity, Vader's life support system ensures a consistent physical performance level, where Yoda is forced to draw heavily from the Force to compensate for his extreme old age.
Yes and no. While Vader's cybernetics do enhance his baseline physical capabilities far beyond the human norm, it mustn't be forgotten that his peak performance levels come by way of both the prosthetics and Force enhancement. Vader's suit does provide a consistent performance level in the sense that he will always be at a superhuman level, but all this only becomes relevant if Yoda runs out of steam himself. In which case, Vader's superhuman traits are somewhat moot, as almost any sentient is going to be able to take on Yoda with Force augmentation off the table. The reason I draw attention to this specifically is that I really don't believe this is ever going to happen, not to the point where Vader's suit will really be a major factor. Even Yoda on low energies is still, in my opinion, going to be able to summon up enough power to match non-Force augmented Vader. While I in no way think this was Gensarai's intention, his wording leaves the possible implication that Vader's cybernetics play a heavier role in his overall performance than I believe they actually do. It helps a lot, but it is ultimately the Force that gives him that Grandmaster output. If Vader's Force reserves are depleted, he won't be able to achieve anywhere near the insane Yoda-tier physical performance he's known for, cybernetics or no.
His active defense is perfectly suited to neutralizing Yoda's intense physical assault.
An active defense on Vader's part would mean he would have to be able to contend with Yoda's speed. We have seen in his fights with Starkiller, which he showed in his video, that he could not contend with Starkiller on the basis of speed itself. Sure, Starkiller was not able to steamroll through Vader right off the bat, but the Force Unleashed novelization makes note that Vader's lightsaber was eventually, and simply, too slow to match Starkiller. And from the description of the fight, Starkiller seemed to be having a stand-up fight with Vader, no flank subversion, as Yoda would be applying against the Juggernaut, which would be even more effective. If Starkiller, a Jedi whose speed was no greater than Yoda, could strike Vader down through a speed-based strike, so too should Yoda with an easier effort. And the main argument one has to buy for this to work is that Yoda would be incapable of subverting Vader at all. Even a Padawan-level Luke Skywalker was able to subvert Vader through his acrobatics, which was solidified again a year later in Return of the Jedi. If these dudes can successfully outmaneuver Vader, so too should Yoda.
Small criticism here. While I of course agree with Antoine's statements regarding the benefits of Yoda's flank subversion, as well as his use of Luke's fights with Vader as an example, though they are a little circumstantial, I feel his references to Galen Merrick are slightly misleading in their presentation. He notes how Merrick was eventually able to get the better of Vader by way of his speed, yet pays no heed to the power gains the Dark Lord made between Force Unleashed and Return of the Jedi, nor his conduct in following stories. As described in the Force Unleashed 2 novelization, Starkiller, despite possessing equal speed and an extra blade at his disposal, was not able to replicate his template's feat, as Vader had since made adjustments to his style and armor specifically to address the clone's physical output.
So Vader's armor can be deemed as lightsaber resistant, but only consistently at the pauldrons. The other scans that he shows of people cutting Vader were grazing wounds rather than effective cuts. If Yoda were to strike anywhere but Vader's pauldrons, he would likely be cut through clean.
I would also argue that Vader's helmet can be deemed as lightsaber resistant, as we have seen it take direct strikes on several occasions with only minor damage. Unsurprising, given that the piece was enhanced by Sith alchemy upon its assembly. Again, very minor point, but worth noting.
As all of his attacks are performed as leaping spins, this means that his attack vectors are restricted by his angle of rotation. If he is spinning from left to right, that until he has a chance to reorient his spin, he can only attack from left to right.
You'll hear this argument a lot from Jin Sarai and Evan Nova, the drawbacks of the Suma rotations for Yoda. You'll notice that when he talks about this, he speaks about it in theory, but never in application. For one, Yoda is not limited by left and right maneuvers, as he would suggest. These cuts can be applied with slight vertical angle changes by simply adjusting one's wrist. Further, each opponent who has faced Yoda, knowing his style, could not subvert this. So there is nothing solid backing up this notion that Yoda's rotations have been a negative effect against his opponents.
And the unspoken weakness of a fighting style based around generating momentum and power with flying acrobatics is that if Yoda ever came up against something he couldn't knock aside or cleave through, he'd simply bounce off.
But Yoda does not fight this way. He does not knock aside or cleave through like a Vader. Ataru is about flank subversion, not direct assaults like a Jimso specialist. If Yoda is employing his technique correctly, he should not be meeting walls like this because he is sliding through his cuts, not statically pounding.
Thanks for the shout out, always nice to contribute. I've got nothing to say about the first point since I agree with it. However, I do want to throw a few tidbits at the other two. While it is true that Dooku, Sidious, and I guess Mace were unable to overcome Yoda despite knowing the ins and outs of his Ataru style, simply knowing the technicals of a foe's fighting style does not lead to an automatic opening if your skill level can't carry you through. Dooku, for example, possessed an intimate knowledge of all 7 classical saber forms as well as Yoda's own applications of them, yet was still halted by Yoda's Ataru Whirlwind, and even Kenobi's Ceresu Wall and Anakin's Gemso Onslaught, due to the sheer skill with which they employed them. This means that if Yoda were ever confronted by a duelist who directly matched him in raw experience, which Dooku and to an extent Sidious don't, then he would be subject to the same weaknesses that all users of Form 4 share. Focusing on the criticism of the Su-Ma rotation factors specifically, the reason I personally put so much stock into the issue of Yoda's reliance on them to the extent that I do, probably less than Jin Sarai, but still, is because we do have an instance of his acrobatics being exploited by another Force wielder, and even if one were to try and argue around this display by citing the time frame in which it takes place, the Grand Master has only ever been noted to transcend Ataru's weaknesses in regards to body exposure, not momentum displacement.
However, where Yoda simply developed Ataru and Ceresu to their nth degree and left it at that?
No.
While Yoda is certain to successfully outflank Vader and score hits, Vader can tank the damage.
Again, as we've seen from proper cuts, Vader cannot tank all damage, even from the sequence that he is showing here. This is an opponent well below Yoda's pay grade. If his argument is that Yoda would need to land several hits against Vader to effectively cut through, which isn't actually the case so long as Yoda is not attacking his pauldrons, then Yoda can certainly make that happen. It's not like Yoda would cut at Vader once and just stop.
Worth noting that when Vader fought Shah Kun and even Boltar Swan and the others, as Antoine referenced elsewhere, Vader was way below his eventual prime at the time. He had only just been put into the suit and had yet to adjust his fighting style and general approach to combat accordingly. Also, helmet.
The only proven way to deliver significant damage is by penetrating Vader's defenses directly and actually hacking into or impaling him.
I guess we'll just forget about this scene then.
Amped Luke, hindered Vader, he's endured identical injuries without crumpling in that way, but yeah, the point still stands. Vader can definitely be damaged or even killed in more than just those 2 ways.
Dooku exploited this weakness to facilitate his retreat in both of their engagements, forcing Yoda to choose between pursuing him or saving his allies from Dooku's death traps.
To say Yoda is completely incapable of multitasking because Dooku sent a several-ton pillar hurling at his Jedi comrades is again dismissive. As if Vader would be able to do anything different, as though Vader could lift that pillar and simultaneously pursue Dooku with a Force choke. Jin Sarai already notes how difficult it is for Vader to multitask himself with his Starkiller fight example. So to use this example against Yoda just feels like more lowballing, without applying the same analysis to Vader.
Worth noting that since these 2 videos were released, one of the new Darth Vader comic issues depicted him choking 2 clones while simultaneously keeping a grenade from exploding decades before his prime. Not the same scale thanks to the size of the pillar and attack of the clones and the need to break through a Force wall for the choke, but the feat does demonstrate his skill with Force multitasking. Oh, the ever uphill battle of keeping up with popular characters' feats.
but he is inexperienced at contending with equally powerful adepts.
Yoda being inexperienced with fighting Force adepts of equal power is true enough, but the reason for that is because no one during the time was equally as powerful as Yoda. And if Jinsarai goes on to argue that Vader is somehow equally powerful to Yoda, that's simply not the case. In terms of raw power, Yoda and Sidious are equals. We saw that from their tug of war, and as stated by George Lucas himself, Vader is only 80% of Palpatine's raw power, meaning he is not a peer of Yoda in terms of raw attributes. Skill is a different argument, but the raw power argument is as solid as it gets. So if one's argument is to say that Yoda does not do well against those with equal power, sure, you can have that. But Vader is not one of those opponents.
Oh, for the love of... The power creep, 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 the power creep. Why does no one acknowledge the power creep?
And in a direct contest of Force power, Yoda would no doubt win.
Alright, we agree there.
Ditto.
Based on Yoda's demonstrated performance against Palpatine, Vader's rapid-fire Force throws would be an effective subversion.
No, it would not, because he is trying to compare the offensive output of an opponent who has greater power, and thus, greater scale and fluidity over thrown objects than Vader himself. This example does not work as a one-for-one comparison, as he's trying to sell. He'll even go on to say that Yoda had no trouble with Dooku because there was a gap in power levels, but then argue that somehow Vader's power levels could breach that gap.
If Vader can toss around trees, boulders, cloning platforms, starfighters, and space frigates with only minor levels of difficulty, Senate pods aren't going to be an issue. What I think Antoine is trying to say here is that Palpatine can go beyond Vader's ability to throw objects given his greater power, which is obviously true. But it's not particularly relevant in this context. It doesn't matter whether you're throwing a Senate pod or a starship, if it hits Yoda, he's dead. Using the Senate fight distracts from this point, I think. Granted, Jen kind of invited this criticism by using a feat that isn't a direct one-to-one comparison, but still.
What it comes down to is this. Yoda has no experience tussling with Force wielders of equal or even comparable strength, or even comparable strength, or even comparable strength.
Now Jinsarai is suggesting that Vader has comparable strength to Yoda? 20% is a very large deficit of power in a 100% scale. I would not say Vader is comparable to Yoda's strength in the Force. That's like saying a B- is comparable to a A+.
True. But as mentioned, Yoda has been challenged on the Force front by a lesser Darksider and isn't scaled to the same Sidious that Vader is. I won't deny the Grandmaster's supremacy, but the gap in strength is not as large as many believe. Also, power creep!
Grandmaster Yoda has been directly involved in the combat training of every single Jedi for the past 800 years, which has led those same Jedi to model their fighting styles on him.
This kind of irks me because it suggests that the failings of the other Jedi that contended with Vader could somehow carry over to Yoda as another one-for-one comparison. A band of Jedi who were substantially less powerful and less skilled than Yoda.
And because Yoda is the core archetype that every Jedi of that time frame is emulating, he is exactly what Darth Vader has optimized his skill set to combat.
And then to say that Vader was optimized to face Yoda as an argument that he will defeat Yoda does not work because Dooku tried the same exact thing.
Yeah, I'm with Antoine on this one. Referencing an opponent's similar style is important, but doing so without factoring in skill level is haphazard at best. I'm pretty sure Connor would be with us on this one now, but still worth noting for the sake of it being in the video.
Dooku went against Yoda's teachings and went the route of Form 2, which made him deadly effective against just about every Jedi except Yoda, much in the same way Vader went on to be quite deadly effective against every other Jedi. Dooku knew Yoda's form, probably more intimately than Vader ever could, because they had a direct master-apprentice relationship. Yet Dooku earned no advantage for it. Dooku was so flustered by Yoda that he had to change his style completely just to cope, and Vader will be put under the same duress. And when Dooku tried his hand at overcoming Yoda with the Force, he failed.
Although the nature of Dooku's relationship with Yoda does mean that he would understand his master's style better than Vader would, even accounting for Anakin's experiences, I would also like to add on to Antoine's point that this similarity goes both ways, as the Grandmaster himself alludes to. This doesn't diminish Yoda's success in these bouts, since he still, won, but it does offer him advantages that would not come into play in a fight against Vader.
Vader has a different style but the same outlook against Jedi. He defied what they were and what they became, specifically fighting their archaic ways. But like Dooku, he hasn't done anything in his Sith career to suggest he'll do any better.
He doesn't have feats to suggest that he would, but he does have accolades that are worth acknowledging, I think. Well guys, that concludes this Star Wars discussion. I realize this was a bit of a controversial topic, however, people have been asking me to cover Darth Vader vs. Grandmaster Yoda in some manner or another over the years, and with Versus Series Season 7 still in production, the time simply felt right. Thank you to Jensarai1 and Antoine Bandelay for their additions to the match. I enjoyed both your takes immensely and encourage anyone who has not yet seen their full videos to go and check them out. Send some love their way. I hope my own video will stand as another good example of expressing an opinion and discussing it in a constructive manner. As always, please leave your thoughts or questions in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys later.